Hello, I'm Toycat, and there are three major ways that countries charge you when you travel internationally. The first is an expatriation tax, the second is a departure tax, and the third is the dreaded tourist tax. Let's talk about examples and the extent of all three, as well as the countries that do them the worst. And let's start by mentioning the expatriation tax, because fun fact, you are a tax resident of where you spend most of your time in a year. This means basically by default, if you spend over 183 days somewhere, you'll become an automatic tax resident of that place, and you only usually pay taxes to one government unless you live in one of these two places. So this is Eritrea, and this is a country you might not be familiar with, but it's the United States of America, I've heard after Googling. And if you are from one of these two places, you don't just pay tax based on where you live. If you live in Germany, for example, you'd pay German taxes, but you'd also pay tax based on your passport, which means to the American or to the Eritrean government. This is a very big deal, and honestly, I think the only reason we don't make more of a fuss about it is because it only really applies to wealthy people because of the foreign tax credit, which, fun fact, it changes every year, but the IRS does not list exactly how much it is on their website. Instead, they just say, yeah, you've got to claim for it if you have foreign taxes on your income, your war profits or excess profits. And I just think it's hilarious that not only does the IRS insist that if you're going to be making money profiteering on a war, that you pay your taxes on it, but also that they'll give you a tax credit for that. Very, very on brand, gotta say. And so, yeah, as a result, if you are from one of these two countries, you pay if you earn any money outside of your country as if you never left your country, or at least with a tax credit if you have, which is kind of nutty if you ask me. Speaking of things that are nutty if you ask me, let's move on to aviation taxes. Sorry, wrong tab. Let's move on to aviation taxes here, because when it comes to leaving a country, this can get pretty expensive based on the country you're going through. So as you can see, this is just mapped for Europe, but every single country has some form of a departure tax. This is often called something different, which is what makes it so hard. If we look at a flight that I'm booking right now, fun fact, I'll be in the Newark airport in late January. Please don't come and see me, but I think what is important is the fact that if you look at this ticket, you can see not just this huge pop-up window saying, hey, I know that you specifically look for basic economy, but would you like to give us more money to sit in the exact same seat? As well as seeing that, you'll also see a taxes and fees section, which lets you see that although you're paying £309, the actual fare the airline gets is £285 because they have to pass on, like, the passenger civil aviation security service fee, the US passenger facility charge, and just a blanket transportation tax. Are you on transportation? Better pay your tax. And I think that's kind of funny, Percival, but I also think it's worth mentioning that this therefore tells you that every country has different fees that all do the same stuff. This is all going to the US government. Sure, this might only technically cover the passenger facilities that they're charging you for, but I doubt it actually works out exactly that way. And so aviation taxes are kind of messy because every country will charge you different amounts, and these are just averages. So in the UK, we have the highest aviation taxes in, I believe, the world, the highest departure tax in the world, but it's not 40 euros, it's more or less based on when and how you're flying. So basically, it used to be there were just two bands. If you flew more than 2,000 miles, you paid a different rate to less than 2,000 miles, but now the way it works is based on the distance from London to the destination capital city. If it's 0 to 2,000 miles, you pay one rate. If it's less than 5,500 miles, you pay a rate, and if it's over 5,500 miles, you'll pay a higher rate. But what's really weird about this is this sounds like, oh, London to destination capital city, there's got to be some loopholes there. So for example, if you are flying to the far east of Russia, Russia's capital is really close to the UK, Moscow, it's just under 2,000 miles, but if you wanted to fly to the far east of Russia, it would be more like 5,000 miles. Would you pay the lower taxes? What about stuff like the Cayman Islands? The capital of Bermuda, or the capital of the Cayman Islands, are actually London, I mean, based on the country they're in. So as a result, would you be? And the answer is no. They got really boring and they closed all these loopholes, saying that, yeah, Russia is a separate country east of the Urals, which I think is kind of nuts. I also think excluding Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands is another wacky decision. There are also, and the British Virgin Islands and everything else, they've worked out basically how to remove all the loopholes, and so it's just distance from London to the city you're flying, basically, which a whole point for another day. Geography nerds, we should get savings on taxes if we're willing to work out the best loopholes and stuff like this. But what I also think is interesting is if you look at it, it's based on the seat that you're in, so you pay a higher rate if you have more legroom, and you pay an even higher rate if your plane has fewer than 19 passengers, and it means that actually the departure tax from the UK is between £7 and £607. wait, between, I guess as of 2025, it will be £7 and £673. This is quite high, of course, and it means that it's kind of, it's very hard to actually say that the tax for leaving the UK is just this. But this is why I think the much more useful stat is the departure tax article on Wikipedia. It still misses certain, like aviation taxes, but you can see the very highest tax in the world is apparently Mexico. It's $65. Wow, I did not know it was so high. I feel like I've booked flights out of Mexico for less than 65 US dollars, and I'm a non-Mexican national, and I do not have permanent resident status. I was connecting flight though. Okay, there we go. Simply explained. So yeah, the highest tax that everyone pays in the world is Mexico. Fun fact. That's actually kind of nutty to hear. Fiji pays a decent amount too, and Australia is pretty high up. But again, it's the passenger movement charge. It's really just for... The point here is to say is that it's actually very hard to compare departure taxes. Countries that officially have no departure taxes. So if we scroll all the way down here, you can see that, like, well, technically speaking, there are some really low taxes when you leave Brunei, but I bet you still have to pay for all those border security fees, etc. And so it's actually not easy to compare these in a like-to-like way, which is why I want to instead talk about the final category, because fun fact, as much as I love departure taxes, as much as I love the fact that if you're from one of these countries, you get a little bit screwed on your ability to move countries, I think one of the weirdest taxes in terms of the reaction from people is that of tourist taxes. So here's a fun map from Globe Hunters where they just show each country and where they have tourist taxes. In the two biggest Austrian cities, there is a 3% tourist tax. In Belgium, it's fixed at €2.39 or 2.50 or €2. In Brussels, I want to tell you, it is the most insane formula. When they say a rather complicated formula is used to work out the tax here, trust me they are not making that up. I stayed in Brussels when I was like 19, and they were like, yeah, so there is this tourist tax here, but then you've got to pay VAT on the tourist tax, but then you have to pay VAT on the VAT, and that sounds made up, but it was for like 8 euro cents, so I doubt they were just trying to scam me. Either they didn't understand what was going on with their system, or ultimately what I'm saying is, no one in Brussels understands how the tourist tax seemingly works. In Prague, it's really, really low. In Paris, it's incredibly low. Whereas in Germany, it goes up quite high in some places. And if we skip through these fun diagrams, you can see there are some actually fairly high tourist taxes in the world, with the most notable example that Wikipedia calls out being the Houston city, which charges 17% of the cost of lodging daily. Presumably because lots of people are going there. You know, no one's going to Houston because they're like, oh yeah, I've heard it's a beautiful city, lots of sights to see. You're there on business, and so your employer pays a 17% tax, and so the Houston city can fund their zoo and their fine arts museum, and what do cities in America even have to fund? The Eleanor Tinsley Park. I think I might have been in this one, actually. Anyway, with that said, the important thing here is to say that as a result, tourist taxes can be very, very high, but they are high not partially to raise money. I mean, that's great too, right? But raising €1 of every single person who comes into Lisbon is going to raise you some amount, right? Like 45 cents a day in Barcelona, but it's sort of a anti-tourist, it's sort of a measure to raise a bit of money and still seem like you're like, yeah, we're going to make the tourists pay their fair share, because the world is coming down against tourists very, very hard. Lots of cities and countries, but Barcelona is the most famous, lots of cities are saying, yeah, we hate you tourists, you are ruining our country, tourists go home. It's kind of funny, we had this big wave of anti-immigration in Europe like 10 years ago, and now we're having a wave of anti-tourism. Don't come, you can come here to live if you want to, but don't you dare be coming here to visit. If you come here and you spend money and then you leave rather than being a drain on our government services, I would hate you for that. And obviously I'm being very facetious here, because actually a lot of people believe that people come in via cruise ships and people come in on a little day tour. They just come and look at the city. They just, crowd up the streets. They don't really put a lot of money into it, which is something which they would say. And in the case of Barcelona, they're upset because the prices of their housing has gone up. Meanwhile, everyone keeps turning their apartments into Airbnbs. And obviously in actually dynamic markets, it shouldn't matter if the I feel like there is a fixed amount of housing supply. Increase the housing supply, and then both tourists and citizens can live. But when you artificially constrain it, people feel like it's a choice between people who live there and tourists, and so they tell the tourists to go home or spray them with water guns, which is kind of sad, you might be able to say. But when you think about it, it's kind of nuts, because when you look at so this is the UN World Tourism Organization. So their numbers basically work out exactly how many people go into a given country. So we're going to talk about tourism arrivals, right? And you can see that the highest share of tourism arrivals is France, followed by Spain, then the United States, Italy, Turkey, Mexico, the UK. All the countries that you've heard that someone has gone on holiday to are all listed right here. But interestingly, about 8% of people who go anywhere in the world go to France. About 7% of people who go anywhere go to Spain. And that's kind of nuts when you think about it on a proportional level. To have, 40 million people, but then to get such a high percent of the world's tourists, or, let's use it as volume total, shall we? To get more than your population, more than double your population tourists each year, means that lots of people are going to encounter lots of tourists, and unlike citizens, you can scapegoat some of your citizens, but then they won't vote for you. You can scapegoat tourists all you like, and what are they going to do? Are they going to have some issues with you? And so that's why lots of countries are turning against tourists. I do think that ultimately it is why tourist taxes are being introduced. You need to make it seem like tourism is a win-win. You get to visit a city, but in exchange, as well as paying all the VAT and all the other weird fees you pay, you just also got to spend 4% of your price per room per night, and then you can fund some of those government services that everyone loves so much. And it seems to be a reasonable compromise, but what do you think is the question I'm going to leave today's video on. Do you think tourist taxes are a good thing or a bad thing? Because I think that there is a real knife edge of countries deciding, yeah, actually, we'd rather just have the higher value tourists. New Zealand just changed their tax, by the way. This is where the inspiration for this video came from. It was $35 when I made my video last week, but it went up to 100 New Zealand dollars. It is very, very, very expensive to go to New Zealand, and they basically decided, yeah, we would rather have the higher value tourists rather than more of them, and that leaves other countries in the world, the Turkeys, the Italys, the etceteras, to soak it all up. Side note, one last thing, is anyone else shocked by this list? Like, I am shocked that France is the most visited country on Earth. Like, do those people not know that there are other countries? Is something wrong with them? And I guess also I'm surprised that the US is so low, because it is such a big country with so many individual states, and also I feel like more people live closer to the United States than to France. I guess that can't actually be true. I guess if you count EU movements, then there's probably a big boost to countries like France, Germany, and Spain. I wonder, the UN needs to get, but I would love to know how this is all calculated. Also, yeah, the UK being like the 7th most visited country in the world feels like it tracks to me. But is that surprising to you? More people go to the UK than Germany. That doesn't track to me at all. But what is surprising is the fact that no one goes to Montserrat or Palau. I should go to Montserrat just to fix that, shouldn't I? Dominica, Vanuatu, Anguilla, St. Kitts and the Nevis. St. Kitts and the Nevis, I believe that I think I'm gonna go visit you. So let's go today. What does St. Kitts and the Nevis have? St. Kitts and the Nevis. I believe Hamilton was born there. They've got a really funky flag that no one ever suspects from the region, and they've got Brimstone Hill Fortress National Park. Let's go give it a peek. Oh yeah, this is worth traveling to. Why have only, what is that, like 100,000 people went to St. Kitts and Nevis last year? That's a New Year's resolution for me. Speaking of traveling, by the way, I think I might be streaming on this channel soon, just as a fun little thing. I just got back from visiting my 52nd country, and yeah, I'm excited to talk maybe about where we should go in the future. If you're excited for that, then stay tuned. Otherwise, second channel, don't care, except I do care a little bit. Love you really. Goodbye.